So, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us. As we already know, the FIFA World Cup has entered its first ever round of 32 knockout stage. I'd say the chaos factor is already high, with the tournament delivering significant unpredictability and operational complexity. Early knockout matches have seen some major upsets. Germany's elimination on penalties, and the Netherlands knocked out by Morocco, alongside historic moments such as Canada securing their first ever World Cup knockout win. I know Spencer and Julia are pretty happy about that. At the same time, we've seen several traditional football powers struggle to assert dominance, late goals, penalty shootouts, and tightly contested fixtures. What this has really meant is that there's been some volatility contributing to shifting crowd dynamics, rapid changes in travel flows and travel plans, and also heightened demand around unexpected fixtures. This mid-tournament webinar will aim to deliver a timely update from our experts that have joined us today on what has been observed on the ground and how these insights should inform planning for the tournament's decisive stages. We've talked about the kind of fluctuating crowd densities driven by those unexpected outcomes, and then also looking at how we can translate early experiences into clear, actionable recommendations. I'm Jacob Painter, the Director of Risk Programs Advisory here at Healix, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's session. I'd first off like to welcome our speakers. I'll start with Julie. So Julie is the CEO of the Canadian Centre for Open Source Intelligence. Julie featured as an investigator on Channel 4's Hunted, with 30 years experience, first as a British police detective and subsequently as a cybercrime expert. Julie's a best-selling author, international speaker, and the founder and CEO of the Canadian Centre for Open Source Intelligence. Julie specialises in tackling high-stakes issues, including human trafficking, financial crime, and online safety and security, and does that by turning complex data into actionable intelligence. Welcome, Julie. We're
Thanks.
also then joined by Spencer Haslam. Spencer is our Regional Security Coordinator for Americas, based out of our Vancouver office. He specialises in security, intelligence, and risk management in the United States and Canada, alongside the day-to-day Global Security Operations Centre operations. He currently leads the GSOC's content team for the 2026 World Cup. Welcome, Spencer. So, Spencer, we're now past the group stage. What are the most important patterns you've seen emerge, particularly around crowd movement, transport pressure, and operational bottlenecks?
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. We saw a lot of concern before the tournament about how much business as usual operations would be impacted in host cities, how much just people's day-to-day life would be impacted in host cities. What we've seen is that the level of disruption on match days is obviously it's very high. You have security perimeters around stadiums, you have road closures, you have significant demand surges for public transportation before and after the match, as well as taxis and rideshare services and even private vehicle services. What we haven't necessarily seen that was a big concern before the tournament is non-match day disruption. So I can tell you from living in Vancouver, living in a host city where traffic is already bad to begin with, non-match days, it's pretty much been normal stuff, business as usual, and that seems to be reflected around in a lot of host cities. So while a lot of organizations and maybe risk managers were entering this tournament thinking it was going to be 40 days of consistent disruption, that hasn't necessarily been the case. It's more been that match days, high levels of disruption, as you would expect from having 50 to 80,000 people entering your city and going to one single event. But on non-match days, it's pretty much been business as usual. And that discrepancy is something that maybe wasn't anticipated before the tournament started.
Perfect. And where have the reality and pre-tournament assumptions diverged the most?
Yeah, so if you were here at our pre-tournament webinar and you've read some of our reports, we talked a lot about the geopolitical risks that were involved with this tournament, whether that's ICE, anything to do with the Trump administration, really, but also all the backlash from all the global conflicts out there, whether that's in the Middle East or other ones. I can say that the number one concern, which was that we'd have ICE at World Cup matches, we'd have fans having their immigration documentation checked, their visa checked, and incidences similar to what we saw in Minneapolis a few months ago happening outside stadiums. That hasn't been the case. Thankfully, that which has significantly lowered a lot of the geopolitical risks and the security risks for fans and just for local residents alike. I mentioned the Middle East conflict, so Iran has been eliminated from the tournament, so that's not something we really need to worry about going forward. But if we were to do a little bit of a retrospective glance on how that worked out, there were some protests outside their matches in LA. There were what I would call isolated skirmishes between some pro monarchy fans and some pro government fans, but nothing that would make your average fan unsafe, nothing that would make your local resident unsafe, nothing that would disrupt your day-to-day business operations if you were in Los Angeles. They also played in Seattle. I went to that game. I had no problems whatsoever. I saw no problems whatsoever. So a lot of talk about how global events were, likely to cause problems at this tournament, and government policy likely to cause problems at this tournament. That hasn't quite materialized as we anticipated, especially what we and other people in the industry and the media, what we were talking about a few weeks ago.
Thanks, Spencer. You talk about talk there and chatter and the media, and Julie, I think around high-profile events like a World Cup,
Mm.
there's always a big risk of misinformation, and that can often
Yeah.
spread very quickly across channels and get picked up by others, and whether that be mainstream media or whatever it may be. In a fast-moving event like this, how do you quickly assess whether a piece of information, video, crowd alert, security warning is genuine, or has it been manipulated in some way?
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge problem, and we have definitely seen this problem occurring with this World Cup. So how do we mitigate it? Good question. So we're really looking at two things. We're always looking at any online piece of information. We're looking at the source and we're looking at the data. And we look at these initially as two separate parts of that piece of information. So when we're looking at the source, first of all, we're saying, is this source known and trusted? Are they verified on this particular platform? As we know that on certain platforms like X or LinkedIn, you can verify your information using government ID, and it does reduce the risk of fake identities and bots being used in these circumstances. However, we also have to realize that verified badges can be purchased on certain platforms. They can also be spoofed, they can be created. So it's not a foolproof method, but it is better than no verification at all, providing you're able to look kind of behind a facade and see what's really there. So when we're trying to verify content, for example, we're going to look at whether it's generated by or propagated by bots or AI or accounts with no history or no verifiable identity. So really first we're digging into that source, because you can have good information and a bad source, or you can have good source and bad information. So we need to figure out which is which, first of all. When we're looking at the data, we're looking at whether the data that we've got is congruent with other information that we've got relating to that same event or that same piece of information. And there's a lot of different ways that we can do this. So we can conduct reverse image searches on Google or use AI tools to determine the time that or the date that a certain piece of information was first seen. Something that we often see at large events is people recirculating old images. So images from other events that occurred in different countries or different matches that then are attributed to the current time, and they're not current at all. So just basically doing those initial searches, looking for the source, looking for the data, running those reverse image checks. And then nowadays we have the benefit of artificial intelligence, where we can, there's many artificial intelligence tools where you can drop in a bit of text, an image, some hashtags, and see whether or not something has been altered or generated by artificial intelligence. This allows us, particularly when we're looking at images or we're looking at videos, there's many tools now where we can conduct very rudimentary and basic error level analysis. We're all image forensic people now. And the tools are out there that allow us to do those basic forensic checks on either images, language, so we can do a basic linguistic analysis. And all of this can be done within our Google toolbar. So this is not complicated. If you're using an AI tool, it's actually easier than ever to determine whether or not something is real or fake. But it is just taking that initial step to kind of pull apart that source and that data and examine them individually. When they're put together, they can often look very real. It can often look like something that would sound likely to be happening. But some basic checks doesn't need to take a long time. It's not that difficult to figure out. And then if we're looking at a live event in a city, in a public space, we've also got the use of webcams and other reverse geolocation tools to determine whether something is actually escalating on the ground or whether this is a series of bots that are creating an incident that isn't actually occurring at the time.
Amazing. And it's quite useful to know that there are actually some tools available already where you don't necessarily need to have a complete OSINT capability to be able to do those basic checks. Thinking about where we are now and we're mid-tournament, have you seen examples where false information could realistically change movement decisions, the safety postures, or even executive behavior?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, the 2026 World Cup has been the biggest fraudulent event in the history of any footballing event or any sports event up to now. So we have broken all the records for fraud and automated disinformation and that sort of campaign. So in the lead up to this World Cup, intelligence agencies have been tracking massive automated disinformation infrastructures, and these were pre-positioned to commit massive fraud during the World Cup in various places. So it started with over 13,000 fraudulent lookalike domains, and these were spun up prior to the World Cup to mimic official ticketing and also transit hubs. So people were buying tickets, people were buying and tickets not just for games, but for hotel reservations, for transit. And it turns out a lot of these were fraudulent. So these threat actors were using generative AI to clone voices and faces of organizers and athletes. And in terms of the advanced ticketing, a lot of these domains and the people involved acted as live intermediaries between the fans and the actual checkout lines. So instead of just being able to steal people's credit card numbers on a website, because of the technology that we have now, these sites were also successfully intercepting one-time passwords that were being released by the legitimate websites. And that was allowing scammers to bypass two-factor authentication of victims and drain their bank accounts directly without them ever coming into contact with the legitimate website where they were seeking to do a transaction. So that's one way that we've really seen an impact at this World Cup. And then we've also seen another big area has been fake job postings. So an awful lot of people are seeking short-term employment in the run-up and involving the World Cup in various places. And so we've seen, of course, as we always do, a lot of fake job recruitment listings and calendar links. And again, these are designed to steal credentials. So they're stealing corporate login email credentials. They're learning the landscape of a corporation by how people are applying for jobs. And that's created a huge problem with a lot of people being defrauded based around these fake job postings. And even with my own company, we've had impersonation attempts and spoofing with companies pretending to be my company, hiring people when in fact we weren't hiring at all. So anybody is susceptible to this, whether you're involved in the World Cup or not. And then, of course, we've seen other things when it comes to accommodation. So scraping legitimate home sharing listings and making them look like real websites. So, if you're looking for an Airbnb, you're looking for a hotel or somewhere to stay, couch surfing type thing. We've seen a lot of cases of rental fraud and cases where property owners have been scammed out of thousands of upfront registration fees by sites that masquerade as official World Cup hospitality vendors. We actually saw this as well, but it was slightly less sophisticated at the UEFA Champions League in Paris in 2022, and that was when the Liverpool and Real Madrid game, I think. And there was a massive bottleneck that occurred at that outer security perimeter. And rather than recognizing that there were actually some technical issues, a rumor spread that a large majority, 70% actually, the tickets were fake. And this was actually propagated by the governments and by official websites at that time, who believed that there was a mass ticketing fraud, when in actual fact, it was a technical issue. And they ended up turning massive numbers of people away who were legitimate ticket holders. So it actually can occur in exactly the opposite situation as well, where you have rumors of fake tickets or rumors of fraud that then slow everything else down and cause frustration. And that can also cause public disorder events as well.
So thinking about that, and obviously you would trust those sources normally if they're coming from the government, that actually maybe they may be fake tickets when actually it looks like it's a technical fault that might be responsible. But what simple checks can organizations be applying now in real time without the need for the specialist tools or dedicated OSINT capability? Because we know that's not always available for everyone with the budgets that they have, and it can sometimes be constrictive.
Exactly, and you actually don't need any expensive tools to do this. Certainly, in our work, we try and steer away from expensive tools, because actually, a lot of the tools that are publicly available will do the job quite almost as well. So when we're dealing, with physical information or images, as we've said, one of the best and quickest methods is reverse image searches. You can either take photos on your phone to verify something, even things like a QR code, or if you're seeing an advertisement for something, you can take a quick picture, do a reverse search on that, see if that image or that information is popping up somewhere else, and see whether or not any of those other images are being flagged as being fraudulent, whether that information is unique, whether it's being propagated in places that you don't trust. So that's a good way of dealing with images. If you're trying to verify written text or copy, then you also can take a piece of that text and just search that in Google using quote marks. So, or you can use AI to verify if the text is accurate, or if it's unique, or if it was generated by AI. So if somebody has written something to you in an email, or you're looking for a confirmation of something, just take a little bit of the text, put it in quote marks, run it through Google, see if it's popping up somewhere else. Because you often find that if bots or if AI is using certain information and it's fraudulent or it's being propagated, it will pop up in other places. And then simple fact checking, you can use tools like Snopes. Google also has a fact checking tool. There's also, again, AI tools, but you can use sites like factcheck.org, Full Fact. Social media sites like X have got community notes where people will flag disinformation. So it's just a case of doing that extra check to see whether or not the information you're looking at is real. If we want to validate video content, there's tools like Invid, which has a browser extension, or you can use the website version. And that allows you to upload a video that you want to check, and you can examine the EXIF data, the metadata behind that. And you can also do a quick check to see if the content has been altered, or again, if it's AI generated. It really only does take a couple of minutes to do these checks. And again, separate the source from the data and examine each one individually together. So if the source is verified and good, then it gives a little more credibility to the data, and then vice versa. And then you can focus your efforts on trying to determine and validate the information or the media content.
That's great. Thanks, Julie. And I think, really, really important, that diligence in making sure that we're checking that information, because, as you say, we have seen it, and it's the highest case of fraud that's taken place, and lots of people either losing out on their personal money, but also corporate money if they're using corporate credit cards and things like that. Spencer, looking forward, and based on what we've seen so far in the match risk matrix, what specific cities and the upcoming fixtures should organisations be paying closest attention to? And really, what makes them higher risk in practice?
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with the match risk matrix, it's a methodology we came up with. My colleagues in the intelligence team in the Americas region, basically assigning a risk level to each match, which we did for the group stage. The factors we took into consideration were the sizes of the fan bases, whether they had a significant ultras culture or a precedent of fan violence, and then whether the two teams had any sort of cultural or geopolitical rivalry involved between the two countries. If we're looking at the knockout stages going forward, I think the number one example I'd point out would be any Mexico matches that are held in Mexico, which would be the round of 32 game and the round of 16 game. After that, they would move to the United States. But that's probably the number one example of where we've seen a match influence the security environment in a city. We've seen protests in Mexico City, just local activist groups taking advantage of the high profile of those games to bring attention to their causes. We've also seen very high attendances at fan zones, and as a result, when police try to secure the perimeter due to capacity issues, there'll be clashes. So that would be the first one I'd point out. Other ones that still aren't guaranteed yet, so we need to be careful. We're not making too many assumptions, but I've got my eye on a potential France-Morocco quarterfinal. That's a game where there's a little bit of geopolitical tension involved with the Moroccan diaspora in France. We'd also have the potential for a Brazil versus Argentina or an England versus Argentina quarterfinal, just based on past instances of fan unrest between those two fan bases. And then obviously you have, as it continues, you have the quarterfinal, the semifinal, and then the final, where just in general, the security risks are elevated, but the security perimeter is also elevated. But just the high profile nature of those final games at the end is something that elevates the risk factors from both a security perspective and from a day-to-day operations perspective. But at the end of the day, I've just made a bunch of assumptions over who's going to play in the later rounds. I was even writing about the potential risk for a France-Germany match yesterday, and as we saw, that's not going to happen. So you can't predetermine the bracket, and you also cannot predetermine the risks to a match. So that shows the value of kind of just following to see who advances and staying flexible from there.
Perfect. And I think that you mentioned the day-to-day operational elements of these types of things, and we've already seen it with some of the crowd densities. Alcohol-related behaviour is always a big one, especially around football World Cups. And flashpoints to change as well. How do you expect that to kind of progress as we move forward?
Yeah, I think generally the conventional wisdom is that you can expect to increase as the tournament continues. Like I said, as you get more and more matches between two really well-supported countries playing, that kind of thing always becomes more likely. Another thing I would point out is that now you're starting to see stadiums and host cities host their final games. That doesn't mean that World Cup related risks and fan unrest and crowd dynamics stop becoming a thing. I think the number one example I'd give is that the most significant instance of fan violence we saw in the United States was Algeria and Argentina fans who were clashing in Times Square in New York City when their game was being held in Kansas City. So that's a really valuable reminder that no matter what host city you're in, there can still be World Cup related disruption even after your city's finished hosting all your games. So that's the kind of thing that while there's still fan zones going on, and while you have, in most major cities in North America, you have large diasporas of, all kinds of South American and European and African countries, those are risks that you really should anticipate in all 16 host cities all the way up until the final.
Perfect. And Julie, when we're thinking about kind of the online sentiment side of things, how can we help predict where fan
Mm.
unrest might emerge before it becomes visible on the ground?
Yeah, it's a good question, and an online sentiment analysis alone can't predict fan unrest on the ground necessarily, but it can help support other data that indicates organized events such as protests or negative sentiment around a place or an event or a political movement. It can point analysts in the right direction. So it is a good place to start to do your research and to see what's being said online. But while negative sentiment doesn't necessarily lead to physical convergence or even heightened security implications, it can highlight those geographic hotspots or geographic issues, political issues that relate to a particular event or location. So, using sentiment analysis, having a look at what's being said, is it positive, is it negative, can sometimes help with early warning for decision makers about heightened risk or volatile hotspots. And if you are seeing negative sentiment or strong negative sentiment around an event or a location, or events that are happening in another country, which relate somehow to a game, either between rivals or people that are not politically aligned, then it does allow you to, of course, put those checks and balances in place to monitor that more closely. In order to measure online sentiment, again, we have good tools that we can use to do that. One of my favorites is Google Trends, a free tool with Google. So you can go to Google Trends, you can search for hashtags, you can search for regions, keywords, and see what subjects are trending and at that point in time, and whether or not that's trending upwards or downwards in terms of sentiment, terms of hashtag or location, and what those emerging trends are. So if you've got a game coming up and you're seeing emerging keywords that are largely negative or indicative of some kind of on the ground problem, then you've got that early warning. And you may not be seeing that. You may not be able to delve through the amount of noise online that allows you to pick out whether or not negative sentiment is real, or if it's being propagated by certain groups, which definitely does happen. A lot of that is created by bots or AI to create a certain sentiment around an event that isn't actually real either. So when you're searching Google Trends, you're looking at what other people are searching for and what kind of keywords and what kind of sentiment you're seeing in a certain area. So again, we have some of those tools that enable us to do that, but it's important to bear in mind that negative sentiment online doesn't necessarily translate to negative behavior on the ground. It can do, and it is worth keeping an eye on, but the signals coming from the ground are often more reliable unless you're seeing something much more explicit online.
And the $1 million question, Julie, how would you distinguish between that normal fan noise and then what does actually suggest genuine escalation risk?
Yeah. So here's an interesting thing that occurs. So quite often when you're seeing an awful lot of noise, an awful lot of negative bantering and that kind of thing online, often that acts as a type of like pressure cooker valve. People are sounding off online, people are saying all these things, and quite often people have a grievance and they want that grievance to be heard. But when that grievance is expressed online, you often don't see that coming to anything in the real world. It's often these quiet messages or quiet groups that are online that are there, that we then see these incidents popping up. And quite often it's because when there's something serious or actual planning going on, that's done offline. So it can be a little difficult to predict what's going to happen on the ground unless you're seeing an awful lot of discussion or convergence around real situations, real locations on the ground. So something that we always want to look out for, if we're seeing conversation, if we're seeing negative sentiment and we're starting to see people converge and then it goes quiet, or we see people going off platform, we've got this Telegram group, we've got this Signal group, join our private group, join this forum, that's a big red flag. So often when we're seeing that go offline, or when we're seeing things go quiet, or when things are unusually quiet, that's actually almost a bigger red flag in some cases than if we're seeing negative or violent rhetoric online that quite often is just people sounding off. The internet is full of trolls, it's full of bots and people trying to stir up activity. And then one of the other things that we also want to keep an eye on is there are people who will attend any protest. There are people that will create any kind of protest activity because it allows them to raise awareness about their own issue. So they will latch on to other issues and other events and create a protest or create some kind of activism event around something that's unrelated to get, to raise awareness or to create a situation where they can get their own political or otherwise message across or protest about a certain company or a certain group. So you want to be looking out for those individuals, known protesters, people that seem to be leading other people into an activism or protest situation, or that seem to be causing unnecessary problems online. And when you take a look at that individual, you may find that they've also been present at many other different types of protests. So using that kind of linguistic analysis, identifying red flags in language, that's a big thing. Taking a look at whether something is an explicit or an implied threat against an individual, an organization, a location, taking a look at what hashtags are trending or growing in relation to a particular entity or a particular location. Conducting that online reconnaissance is really, really important, and looking out for those key markers. Who are the people involved? Has it all gone quiet? Identifying known agitators and people that escalate or antagonize situations online. And then identifying any organized or loosely affiliated groups who might have their own agenda that they want to push, and are using big events to broadcast their own message.
Okay, no, that's really useful. And we've talked a little bit around kind of people traveling to the games and their travel plans. But Spencer, I wanted to talk a little bit about organisations that actually the host cities, they're kind of business as usual day to day. And what are the most practical adjustments you're advising right now in terms of maintaining that business as usual?
Yeah, I think the number one thing I would still point to is that this depends on your profile. This depends where you're located in a host city. But um, we've seen that maybe the disruption levels and the impact of the event, especially in American cities that have quite a wide footprint, that it's been somewhat hyper localized. If you are right beside a stadium, or you're right beside a fan zone, or you're right beside a transit hub, and you found that rescheduling meetings or calls, or considering work from home, if that works, then that's something I would definitely would say that's a permissible strategy. But by the other side of the token, if you feel like your organization has altered their posture for whether people are in office or your schedules, if you found that the disruption isn't quite as you'd maybe have expected that it would be before the tournament, I think there's nothing wrong with making mid-tournament changes. There's nothing wrong with becoming slightly more business as usual in your posture, rather than anticipating this to be 40 days of complete disruption to your work. I would emphasize that being flexible in your approach, maybe considering the difference between match day versus non-match day, or considering the difference between a round of 32 game versus a final. These are all things that we said before the tournament were important considerations, and I think those are still in place as the tournament's been progressing.
Perfect. And thinking about that, and then obviously the profile and the stakes increase as we kind of close in and get towards the final. What are the risks that you think are rising fastest? So, for example, lone actor threats, fan violence, perimeter breaches.
Yeah, I'll touch on all three really briefly. I think lone actor threats and perimeter breaches are definitely um, very credible security risks to not only match going fans, but also just local residents, local personnel. What I would say is that those two have the risks have been definitely mitigated quite a bit with what I'll call just good institutional competence amongst the security apparatus of the host countries. There was a lot of talk about whether I'd say especially American authorities were equipped to handle this kind of event. And from what we've seen with things like seizure of unauthorized drones flying over stadiums or training sites, or There was a bomb threat called in for the Brazil-Japan match the other day, and I think within 2 hours, authorities had already figured out that it was basically just a hoax. So those two factors are obviously credible threats. They're obviously something that people need to still be vigilant for, but I think it's something where the authorities' security posture has superseded the intent and the capability of any threat actors. In contrast to that, I think fan violence is one of those things, and I'm sure, as Julie could attest from the experience of monitoring this online, it can literally start with two fans who've had too much to drink getting into a disagreement, and next thing you know, you have significant violence going on. It's something that requires a lot less planning. It's something that requires a lot less intent, especially if you go into a match not meaning to cause any problems, and then someone has a few too many drinks, someone accidentally hits you, and then it can spiral from there. So I think that while all of these three they're definitely credible risks, they're definitely something that security managers and also people going to matches should be aware of. I think the number one is to know the signs of fan violence, and then know what to do if you're caught up in some. And really, it's not complicated. The best practice is just find a 90-degree angle to move away as quickly as possible. Try and avoid any lines of police or security who are going to try and be breaking it up, and just if you see a large crowd of fans that have any kind of flares or pyrotechnics or masks on, that's kind of an indicator that you'd maybe want to stay away.
Thanks. And Julie, thinking about the cyber side, what do you think organizations should be most alert to at this stage? I know we've talked about the spoof sites and impersonations and those types of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And the threat landscape for this World Cup is online for sure. As I mentioned, the tournament has triggered the largest World Cup linked cybercrime wave on record across multiple attack surfaces. So we've had, even the FBI came out and warned about coordinated threats, cybercrime, fraud, drug trafficking, terrorism, all of these threats linked to the World Cup. So some of the main ones we've seen and that we'll continue to see going forward is fake ticketing domains. So this is a fraud, big fraud network. One of the main ones actually originated in China and used clone FIFA ticket sites, live streaming links, and the one-time password bypassing technique that I mentioned to steal credit card information and login credentials of people that are trying to purchase tickets online. And that's across recognized sites and individuals trying to sell these tickets as well on sites like, I don't know, less organized sites, Facebook Marketplace, for example, places like that. One YouTube analysis that I was looking at a couple of days ago cited 19,000 fake domains that were able to access or be viewed by over 1 billion people. So this is a big problem. As you've mentioned, we've seen massive phishing campaigns, and a lot of these are identified as what we call imposter league campaigns. So highly polished, difficult to spot phishing attacks, and the people being impersonated in these attacks are FIFA HR and talent acquisition staff who are targeting job seekers using calendar invites and fake surveys. So did you attend this match? What did you think? And then those credentials are being stolen. So that's a big one. These phishing campaigns where you receive a link to fill out a survey, you receive a link to go and get your ticket, and effectively you're going to the wrong place. So being able to be a little more discerning about clicking through emails. We all say it all the time, and yet it's still one of the biggest crimes that we're seeing is phishing attacks, because people are still clicking through an email that they believe that they're expecting to see, and being caught out and having their credentials stolen. We've also seen a lot of immigration scams, and we'll continue to see immigration scams as we go through, where authorities have again issued large-scale warnings about fraudulent immigration agents promising guaranteed entry visas for World Cup attendees to certain countries, and then it all turns out to be a scam. So you give over you fill out these fake forms, you give over your fees and your money, and there is no entry visa. So we're seeing that in on quite a large scale as well. And then finally, I would say businesses need to be aware of other types of scams, and these are requests for help. So we've seen this in other ways with kidnapping scams. These are artificially generated voice notes, even videos sometimes, that are spoofed. And it's very, very easy. People don't realize how easy it is to clone somebody's voice. You can clone somebody's voice from their voicemail message, or if somebody's taken part in a webinar like this. And all you need is 10 seconds of somebody's voice to be able to create a spoofed voice clip that you then send to somebody in the company to say somebody has lost their credit card, they've lost their phone, they've lost their tickets, they need some help. They're stuck in a certain place, they can't get out. And can you send some money to this place to get them out of that situation? And in fact, it's not that person at all. So making sure that you've got a physical contingency to counter fake voice cloning or video cloning or fake text messages or other messages. Basically, if somebody from your organization is contacting you in an unusual way, which actually probably would happen if somebody's lost their phone, they're going to use a different phone to call you. If somebody calls you and it's a spoofed, it's a voice that's familiar, you are quite likely to send that money or send that help. So having that secondary point of verification that it is actually an employee or it is actually somebody from your company or your family will save you being caught out in that kind of scam where somebody's requesting money for an incident that's happened.
Yeah, and there's an awful lot of kind of responsibility on the individuals that are at the games themselves to make sure they're looking after themselves. But also, that's a really good point around ensuring that people are verifying the information that they might potentially be
Mm.
receiving from their people, because that could also pose a potential risk. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think really useful to understand that. I think we've talked a lot about the what's happened so far, what we're seeing, what we think might come next. And I know, Spencer, you kind of talked is it's always very difficult because as the games progress and things change and team dynamics change, I think we're always conscious that at high profile sporting events like this, there is room for something quite sudden and dramatic to take everyone by surprise. And these can be more serious in nature. And if we think about active assailant or terrorism related incidents, Spencer, if a serious incident were to occur, for example, attack or a major security event that causes sudden panic, what does a well managed response look like in those first critical minutes and hours?
Yeah, I would number one point to something that like a culture that's set with your personnel that makes them feel enabled to make those immediate decisions right in the aftermath, so that they know what they're doing, whether that's um, what to pay attention for, what signs to pay attention for after an incident occurs. What are the qualities you want to look for in a safe location to stand fast? I know personally for me, when I go to, when I went to the game the other day, I found a hotel right outside the stadium that I know that, a lot of business travelers go to. And I pointed to that internally as like, all right, if anything happens, that's where I'm going to go and stand fast until the situation clears up. You also want to make sure that your personnel know who they're going to communicate with right after, whether that's you as the security manager or whether that's us as the security provider, and then how that triangle of communication, you can call it, how that triangle ends up working in the aftermath. Um, and you want to know who are the kind of authorities you want to be listening to, whether that's stadium security, local police, federal authorities, what kind of authorities you want to be monitoring online for communications after such an event occurs. And then that's, of course, where a lot of what Julie's been talking about, where you want to be able to have confidence in getting information and turning that into actionable intelligence from these kind of things. You don't want to be falling for whether that's trolls or whether that's just info that is posted in good conscience but is simply incorrect. So those are just some of the factors I would point to. But at the end of the day, there is only so much you can do to pre-prepare. Everyone has a plan until they concede 5 minutes into the game, but the important things are, knowing immediately what to do, knowing who to contact, knowing where you can go as a safe location, and then from there you can have your preset protocols that can help inform your decision making.
Thanks, Spencer. I think really valid, and we know from having done lots of these types and handled lots of these situations that communication piece and the preparation you do in the front end is super important. Julie, in that same scenario, we know that there's going to be an awful lot of misinformation that will push conflicting information because it's going to cause panic. How do you ensure, or at least try to ensure, that you're acting on accurate information, not just what is circulating and hitting social media or even mainstream media first?
Yeah, I mean, if you're seeing something online and it's not what you're seeing everywhere else, it's not what you're seeing on the ground, then you've got to ask yourself, okay, what's real and what's not real? You're always coming back to source and data verification. You're always coming back to, how do we validate what we're seeing? How can we, what measures can we put in place both before a situation occurs, during a situation, and after a situation? We've got to look at everything from, okay, yes, we're trying to anticipate threats. We're trying to anticipate risks to our people, to everybody on the ground. So what measures can we take beforehand? We're looking at the planning phase for each game, for each environment. We're watching what's happening elsewhere in the world, and also seeing what's happening politically, both on the ground in countries and online, where a lot of political propaganda is shared. And then, of course, when we're dealing with the incident itself on the ground, we're watching that online environment. How's that changing? Is it growing? Are people generally in support of it, or are people opposed to it? And understanding whether or not those groups and people that are causing issues have support online, or whether their country or their political leaning, the people that may support them, are actually against them, is also, tells us a lot about the next stage, which is, what do we do after that? How do we conduct damage control? How do we make sure that if something happens around us, around our company, around our organization or our individuals, that we're able to properly and quickly respond to that and make sure that that we address that properly? And we've seen that in quite a few cases where certain things have happened. We've seen incidents where players have done an action that is deemed to be a racist gesture, or the whole teams have come out against another team or another political regime. So always making sure that we understand our threat landscape from an online perspective as much as we can, and that, again, we're verifying those sources and that data to make sure we're dealing with the most accurate information that we can.
Perfect. I think very, very good takeaways there for people to think about. We're coming to the end of the webinar, so I just wanted to ask just one question, and to both of you, and Julie, I'll let you go first. But what's one habit or process that organisations should adopt to stay ahead of misinformation during the rest of this tournament?
Yeah, I would say realizing the free tools you've got at your disposal. So for me, when I'm doing something like this, I'm using a lot of Google tools. I'm setting up Google alerts to monitor keywords related to the event. I'm using Google Trends to see what the emerging trends are and sentiment is with respect to each game or each security threat. I'm using dorking techniques to narrow down results to a specific domain. So if I'm wanting to just look at what Facebook is saying, I'm searching Facebook through Google to make that easier, and then identify hashtags and accounts, and then using slightly more advanced techniques, but again, basic geolocation searches on social media platforms. X allows you to search by geographic location, so you can narrow it down to a real specific area to see what's happening and what's being said, so you can anticipate what's going to come up. And then monitoring fact-checking sites, of course, and community notes for disinformation. So just getting familiar with the free tools that are available and making sure that you're using them goes a long way to mitigating any threats.
Thanks, Julie. And Spencer?
Yeah, I would say too that I've actually found very useful myself in looking for information and trying to determine its veracity or not. Number one, use Google Translate and look at sources that aren't in English. I mean,
Mhm.
there's a lot of things that you can miss if you're limiting yourself to English. There's a lot of, especially with a global event like the World Cup, where you had 48 countries and all sorts of different languages involved. So that's something that can really open your net into the kind of chatter you're seeing, whether that's fans organizing or even just news articles or social media posts. The other thing I would point to is that an unfortunate byproduct of the World Cup is that sometimes this is these is countries' best shots to kind of push their agendas about other countries they don't like. You know, those kind of cultural factors that are often overlooked. Make sure you look at the source of who's posting what. Make sure that this is not just an agenda. I saw a few tweets saying that Algerian and Jordanian fans were having a riot basically outside the San Francisco stadium. I looked into it in Arabic with the help of Google Translate. I realized that number one, it was a few fans fighting in a mall in Doha, Qatar, nowhere near San Francisco. And second, all the accounts that were sharing it were based in Morocco. So if you know anything about North African geopolitics, you'll understand what I'm getting at there. But it's really important to, like I said, cast a wide net, look at sources outside English, but also understand what accounts are posting it, what they would gain out of posting it, and kind of taking those cultural and those geopolitical factors into play when you're looking at information about fan behavior.
That's great. Thanks, Spencer. And so I'll wrap us up there. And I just first off want to say thank you, Spencer, Julie. I think been really interesting kind of mid-tournament briefing. So thank you very much for kind of contributing there. I'd like to thank all the attendees for joining. It's great to have you all there, and I think we get a pretty consistent number all the way throughout. So that's great. Just to remind you that you will be sent copies of our special advisory, and there's also a link to our city reports for the 16 host cities, which you can now see has just been added into the chat. If there are any questions, or if a lot of what we've said today suddenly feels quite overwhelming and you've got a lot more work on your plate, do come and chat to us, because that's why we exist. That's why we're here, is to help support you with these major events like this. Have a fantastic rest of the day, and thank you very much for joining.